Okay, everybody, welcome back from lunch. That lunch was great. I always love having a hotel lunch because you get dessert and coffee, and it's a treat. We don't always get dessert at my house. So you folks all have in your bags, we already talked about this a little bit, you have a book. So that is really cool. That was the third awesome thing that I mentioned this morning. So in our next keynote is the author of this book, as well as other books too. So we're very lucky to have her, and I'm going to tell you why we're lucky to have her. So raise your hand if you've heard of a show called Between the Lines. It's on PBS. Yes, it's about books. Somebody said it's about books. It's with a guy named Barry Kibrick. And that show, our speaker was featured on that show. And I thought she was brilliant, even though it was sometime past midnight that I saw her. She was just really good. She was relating data to predicting and changing future events in a really compelling way, and covering subjects like violence prevention and drug addiction, senior issues, trip and fall issues, disasters, and doing it very convincingly. So I was just really loving that. And so I talked to our executive director, Kelly Colopy, knowing data. She's all about data, and it's near and dear to her heart. And we thought, okay, well, let's try to get a hold of this person. And we did. So it was pretty unheard of. We asked her, we did get a hold of her, and we said, can you do the conference in April? She says, sure, what year? 2019? We're like, no, like, 25 days from now. So she was just, couldn't believe it. But lucky, and this is where we're lucky to have her, because lucky for us, she did have a hole in her schedule, and we were able to get her to commit to come down. So we're really thankful for that, and that's why we're lucky. Rebecca Costa is a sociobiologist and futurist. She has a unique expertise in discovering and explaining emerging trends in human evolution, climate change, pandemic virus, public education, disasters, and a lot of other topics too. She's a former CEO of a Silicon Valley advertising startup. She's just like you, she's a UC Berkeley Bear, graduate in social sciences. She's an international best-selling author. Please welcome Rebecca Costa.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Is the mic working okay? Okay, that always helps. They were going to have me speak at this podium, and I said, well, I'm Italian, and if I can't move my hands and walk around, I become suddenly mute. It's a genetic quality. I want to thank Brett, Kelly, and Nelson for giving me the shock of my life that I was coming to Long Beach. I'm on an international book tour right now, and this just somehow miraculously was the right invitation at the right time. Your interests are so diverse, and the work that you're doing is so very important. And I want you to actually just take your hand out, if you will. Would you mind giving yourself a pat on the back? Good job. Good job. Yeah. By a show of hands, and I'm going to ask you to dig a little deep here at the beginning. By a show of hands, how many of you feel like the job that you have to do on a day in and day out basis, and the data that you have to collect and look at has gotten a lot more complicated? Raise your hand. Okay, look around the room. No, keep your hand up. Because this week you can skip your therapy appointment. It's not you. It's not you. Does anybody know what this is? This was the chart General McChrystal put up in front of the press corps. I happened to be in the room when this happened, and he said, when we understand this diagram, we win the campaign in Afghanistan. The longest war the United States has ever been in. This is the current immigration roadmap. This is the Affordable Care Act, how a claim is processed. Oh, we're laughing, but I had to look a long time to find one that fit on one page. This is how electronic medical records travel. According to Carly Fiorina, who's a friend of mine, she says that we're navigating a thicket of complexity. We're, all of us, everybody in this room. But the real question is, how did we get here? How did things get so complicated that when you make a decision, you don't have the confidence anymore? We used to know what was right and wrong, right? And my son started convincing me it was an age thing. He said, well, Mom, when you get older, you get confused. No, I don't think so. Nice try. Nice try. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, all of technology, all of our resources, and I know because my whole career was in Silicon Valley during that time. Now, I didn't know that nerds were going to become billionaires. I was a nerd, and we didn't see that on the horizon in those days. We were the kids that nobody sat with during lunch because we liked math and we liked science, and we thought math and science would save the world. And it turns out we were pretty much right at the time. But we focused on data production and distribution. According to Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, every 2 days we're creating as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization to year 2003. That means Friday you go home, and Monday morning that entire body of data has been recreated while you took 2 days off. That doesn't seem right to me. It's because we overshot our goal. We're producing so much data now. The velocity at which data is coming at us, the volume, the size of the packets and reports that we get. You know, it used to be when you saw a new lab report or a scientific discovery, there would be 1 or 2 names, right, on the report, on the study. Now there are 50 names, and all the scientists are all over the world. You cannot find a major research report where you won't find 50 or 100 scientists collaborating in all different languages. The variety of information we're getting, 1 minute it's video, it's text, it's emails, right? It's Instagram. I've got 50 places to look now. It used to be I just sat at my desk and somebody sent me something in the mail that had a stamp on it, right? Or they called me on the phone. And the veracity with so much data coming at you, how do you know what's true? How do you know what's right? For every study you can find on the internet, I can find 5 that say the exact opposite thing. So what are you supposed to do? You've got limited time, limited resources. In the medical field, which you would think really stays on top of research, information is doubling every 1 to 2 years, and most of it's unstructured, which means you can't search for it, right? And to keep up with breakthroughs, doctors would have to spend 160 hours reading in their field, and most of them, 81%, say they only read maybe 5 hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, but most of them confess to me they're lucky to get an hour in. Medicine has become too complex, so now the burden has shifted to the patient to do research. And that's every doctor's nightmare, is a patient that walks in with a stack of internet studies and says, well, what about this? What about that? Yeah. You didn't go to medical school, right? And yet, 1 out of 5 diagnoses are inaccurate. They're wrong. That's a nice way of saying wrong. There's 1.5 million errors. And you know that millions are now addicted to painkillers. Why? Well, as data and processes become more complex, the number of wrong options that you have begin to outnumber the number of right ones. If anyone asks you for a definition of complexity, and by the way, never buy a book on complexity. Never, ever. That's my field of study, complexity and high failure rate environments. And I have to tell you, my head wants to explode when I read these books. I have an easy explanation for complexity, and here's what it is. More wrong options than right options. That's it. That's a complex environment. And we're living every day in a high failure rate environment. The number of wrong choices you can make are exponentially growing, and the number of right ones proportionally smaller. Which means that we're no longer looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for a needle in a pile of needles. So in the 1990s, recognizing that this was the problem, what did Silicon Valley do? It said, well, we're going to start analyzing. We're going to create search engines, filters, all of this stuff to help you narrow down the information so you can access only the information that you need, when you need it, where you need it. We're going to work on distribution and helping you find stuff. And so they gave us more device types. I don't know about you, but I've got a cell phone, I've got a tablet, I have a computer that's a desktop at my desk. I mean, too many devices, you know, and they're all joined together, but there's different devices being used for different things now. Now they're starting to get assigned. So in 2011, we had a major breakthrough. Did anybody see this episode of Jeopardy? Raise your hand. So they pit IBM's Watson, and this is written about in my new book, against 74-time winner Ken Jennings and the highest prize winner Brad Ruttner. And they said, we think that Watson can search the internet and find the answer faster than these guys could click in. And Jeopardy said, yeah, but Watson can't use the internet. You have to program Watson. Now, if you've ever watched Jeopardy, you have no idea what the categories are going to be. I mean, 1 minute it's famous U.S. stamps, the next minute it's seasonings of India. How could you possibly program a computer? And yet the scientists at IBM did. And when they won, and they won hands down against these guys, they knew they had something that was much bigger than winning a game show. They knew what they had was a self-learning machine. And so their first stop was healthcare. They went into hospitals and they said, we want to set up Watson in normal human language where a person who's intaking someone for an emergency and knows nothing about them could go over and put in all of the symptoms that are known, and Watson would search all medical records instantaneously, everything ever published that indicated those symptoms, and come back and say, 91% probability it's this, 48% probability it's this, 29% probability you have this. But here was Watson's real value. Watson came back to that intake specialist and said, and by the way, if you got me this information next on this patient, my diagnosis would go up X%. It would go to 99%. So it provided a pointer. So your ability to survive an emergency room visit, if you were in critical care, right, suddenly was not dependent on whether the best physician who was knowledgeable about your condition happened to be working that night, which was what was going on before. It evaluates massive amounts of information that no human can. It only looks at objective facts, and it doesn't care if you had an argument with your spouse or you had a cocktail at dinner before you came into work, right? It removes all of the human vulnerabilities of treating people. According to the IDC, big data analytics grew to 150 billion last year, and it will grow to 210 billion. If you are not dialed in to big data analytics today, the train has left the station. Find someone who can help you. Find a resource. Go to a local hospital that's implementing big data analytics. It is what has happened since 2011. We're sitting here at 2018. If you're not using these tools, you need to get on board. Crowdsourcing also facilitates very rapid and cost-effective analytics and helps us get to what the real source of the problem is. This is Jared Heyman. He's the founder and the CEO of CrowdMed. I don't don't know if you know this, but rare diseases are not rare. It turns out each rare disease is rare, but when you add all the rare diseases together, they represent somewhere between 10 and 20% of all ailments. So it turns out even though an individual rare disease is rare, getting a rare disease is not all that rare. And so Jared, he discovered that it took on average 7.2 years to diagnose a rare disease. And that the kind of suffering people were going through, they had to go in and out of specialists, in and out of specialists, and eventually these people wound up in a psychiatrist's office with a psychiatrist convincing them, given all the tests you've taken, it's in your head. Now, can you think of anything more heinous than taking someone who is having real physical symptoms and telling them they're imagining them? But using CrowdMed, Jared Heyman allows people for a very small amount of money, I think it's $150 or $130, you can put in all your tests into a group database, and physicians from all around the world will look at those test data, and every time they diagnose you right, their stature moves up, their weight moves up, right? So the guys that get your diagnosis right every time, they have a higher weight than some patient who goes in and says, I think you have this. I don't have a medical degree, but. And by doing that, he can diagnose 50 times faster, and he's now down to less than 12 months, right? And he's up in the 80 and 90% of diagnosis. So this is a fabulous way of using crowdsourcing. And data visualization. If you're getting bogged down by spreadsheets, I know some of you are, right? And you're getting a lot of data on pieces of paper and that kind of thing, that's not nearly as effective as being able to see a chart or a graph or some kind of data visualization. And that software is readily available. It's for $29. You can buy a software package that will help to take all the data on a spreadsheet and convert it into something that's actually usable. I don't look at spreadsheets anymore. So what was the next leap? So I said, well, we overshot data production and distribution, right? We moved to visualization and analysis. And then the next step is predictive analytics. It's taking all this data we're generating and now looking for patterns so that we can anticipate what's happened in the past is very likely to happen in the future. So how can we use that data to look ahead and prepare for what's going to happen? Because by the time it happens, and I don't need to tell anybody in this room, by the time you have the problem, it's too late. It's too late. So what we've got to do now, particularly with the velocity of data that's coming at us, is we got to get out ahead of those problems. And what forward-looking leaders are doing is they are predapting. They're not adapting. I'm an evolutionary biologist, an expert at adaptation. I will tell you adaptation's too slow. It doesn't make sense to wait until the problem is at your front door. You've got to anticipate that problem is coming, and you've got to quash it while it's small, because by the time it turns into a giant snowball rolling down the hill, it's too late. It hurts to stand in front of a snowball that's the size of a building. We know more about what's going to happen in the future than any other time in human history. When you think about it, a couple decades ago, right? We didn't know if a pregnant mother came in, if she was going to have a girl or a boy. Well, some people did. Some people knew the shape of the belly or whatever the mother craved late at night. Oh, you crave vinegary pickles. That means you're having a boy, right? But nobody, as far as I know, painted the baby's room blue or pink based on that. But now, with 100% certainty, we can tell you, if you want to know. We even have automobiles that are anticipating what lies ahead, far ahead. The MKZ Lincoln is looking at your braking and steering pattern and slowing the car down and warning you, you need sleep. Apparently, we can't figure that out. We can't figure out we can't text and drive a 2-ton vehicle at the same time. And so the government has had to step in, and the government has said, okay, well, we're going to fine you if you try to text and drive, because we couldn't figure out that that doesn't work. You can't look down at a phone in the road at the same time. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in the land of stupid, But self-driving cars are going to fix all that, right? And when you think about it, I just flew in and I got to have a tour not long ago of the Portland Air Traffic Control Center. They're looking at the same things that automobile technology looks at. They're able to go out and see planes that are hundreds of miles away and anticipate their trajectory and their course as well. Every minute of every day, we're learning more about the future, and we can head off problems before they start, and we can get the jump on opportunities that we never knew existed. And so I promised some of you who I was signing books for, this is going to be fun. We're going to have some fun today and look at some of the ways that we can solve problems that are not on the radar. And although I might not use the exact application for the service that you're working in, I hope you'll use your imagination, because that's the title of this conference. Right? Reimagining. And I'm asking you to reimagine technology and reimagining some of the solutions. For example, we can now predict with 86% accuracy if a person is going to fall in the next 3 weeks. You're going, okay, they invited a lunatic. I knew it. Nelson and Brett, can't trust those guys. They invited a weirdo. No. It turns out we've discovered that your normal walking gait changes by 3 to 5 centimeters 3 weeks before you're going to take a fall. We can put a sensor in your pants or a Fitbit-like device on your ankle. For older people, imagine what this means, right? And what does it mean? It means it will alert you. Hey, get into physical therapy. Your walking gait has changed 3 to 5 centimeters. You can't detect that by the human eye. But once it happens, you're in the 86th percentile, right? Stay off of uneven surfaces. Alert caretakers and family members. Hey, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Use a walker, use a cane, avoid the stairs, uneven terrain. Goes on and on, the number of suggestions we could give. We even have airbags for this. If you won't do anything else, strap on a funny-looking belt. Right? Right? Because how many of the elderly lose their ability to live independently as a result of a fall? A lot. And it's estimated that you can keep people at home where they really want to live, with their families where they really want to live, anywhere from 2.5 to 3 years simply by preventing a fall. Easy peasy. We even have sensors built into canes, built into gloves, built into walkers, that will indicate you're putting too much pressure on your right or left-hand side, which leads to feet problems, leg problems, spinal problems, and potential falls, right? So you can go online and say, all right, we want to give these people canes that are sensitive, that have pressure-sensitive sensors in them, so that we can get them in early to see a chiropractor or a spinal surgeon. Foreknowledge is power. It's power. It's the power to avoid these kinds of catastrophes. And while prolonged sitting is really associated, we now know it's the new smoking, and it's associated with health outcomes like obesity and many neurological problems, circulation problems. Actually, prolonged standing's not good either. There's somewhere in between, and I haven't figured out what it is. I'll let you know, because we don't have clear data on how much standing is too much. But one of the things we do know is there are walking chairs. Did you know that these were, how many people knew about the walking chairs? They're wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful. We got our warehouse worker one, and he won't live without it. He takes it home on the weekends. He's not supposed to, but he takes it home on the weekends. You strap it on, you just walk normally, and as soon as you begin to crouch, the chair holds. And so surgeons who have to be on their feet for a very long amount of time, and factory workers, right? Don't wait till somebody has a back problem. Why wait? You know they have to be in that crouching position for 8 hours a day. Why not do something about it? Predapt. And genetics is also paving the way for predaptation. We've never known more about what you were programmed to be and do and how you were programmed to act than we do now. Since 2000, scientists have been perfecting many types of genetic testing. These are some of the cancers and diseases that we can identify very early and head off through genetic engineering, genetic surgeries, and also just being vigilant, flat out vigilant. Mental illness is also heritable. Every day we're learning more and more about depression, schizophrenia, violent behavior, and the fact that there are genetic predispositions for these behaviors. In the case of Stephen Paddock, who many of you know was the Las Vegas shooter, some of you came up to me and said, well, you look kind of familiar. It's because once Stephen Paddock, he happened to shoot about the same time my new book was coming out about predicting behaviors. And I was all over the news about this. And people were saying, could this have been anticipated? And my answer is yes. We could have anticipated. But at what price? At what price? We know that Stephen Paddock had, I believe he lived in 27 residences in 10 years. His father was a violent sociopath. He made it to the top 10 of the FBI. He was prescribed diazepam about 3 to 4 months beforehand. I'd like to find out who that doctor was that took somebody who had a family history of violence and sociopathic behavior and gave him diazepam. He purchased 42 weapons. He started accelerating beforehand. He attempted to buy tracer rounds that allow for more accurate shooting at night. He sent his girlfriend away to the Philippines, wired her $100,000, told her not to come back. He started, his gambling accelerated. He had nothing to lose. He was gambling $100,000 a hand. All of these things are now known. Why? Because we worked backwards. This is my problem with violence. We work backwards. The event happens and then we go, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened, same thing, right, on the Parkland, Florida shooting. We work backwards and we begin to see this was a depressed, highly isolated individual that was giving off all the signs, and in fact, so many signs that people had alerted the FBI beforehand and said, there's something wrong here. We're worried. This kid is going to do something. If you're not mining social media data, that's one of the most important things you can do to head off these crimes, because social media language used is the new canary in the coal mine. You can simply do a search of vocabulary and determine a person is reaching what I call criticality. And those people need special attention. They don't need our usual services, right? We need to surround them. And most importantly, we need to surround them with love. I know, not a scientific term, is it? But we're finding that more than GDP, more than money, more than a job, more than anything, the number one factor which determines whether someone has a zest for life, reports well-being, happiness, is whether they report they have a person to turn to in times of trouble. That one thing will make your community strong. If they answer no, get on it. Get on it. That one thing. Danger words. These are some of the danger words. They're very well documented. Hate, bored, depressed, mad, killed, dead, profanity, any profanity, sick, tired, jealous. There are computer programs that will search social media in your geographic area for these words and tell you who is at risk. Well-being words. Fantastic. Travel, nature, friend, family, volunteer, vacation, great, love, nice. Ha ha. Ha ha. Who knew? You don't write ha ha if you're depressed. Never thought of it. Addiction is also a heritable trait. As you know, we have a national crisis in opioid addiction. A few months ago, I was invited to be the presidential speaker at the National Spine Association. That's not their exact name, but I never get it quite right. And it was 6,000 of the top spinal surgeons in the world that gathered together. And I told them, I read all the same lab reports you read, right? I looked at all the same studies that you look at because I'm a scientist, and I told them, you know what? I also saw that there was only supposed to be a 1% risk of someone getting, well, the studies were wrong, right? We now know that there are, I believe the latest statistic is 91 deaths per day in the United States. It's obscene. And it never needed to happen, by the way, because we have questionnaires that look at your medical records and your behaviors, and we can predict with somewhere between 80 and 90% whether you are predisposed to become addicted to opioids. If you do nothing else, if you work in this field, go to Fuzzy Logic's site. And so I said, you know what, if you want to get rid of the opioid problem, you just require doctors to give people this questionnaire. And wouldn't you want to know if you were genetically predisposed and behaviorally predisposed? I would want to know. And if my doctor said to me, Rebecca, it looks like you could become addicted, I'd ask for a different pain management strategy, right? We also have algorithms that are zeroing in on use and abuse of cannabis. And that's going to become increasingly important. Let's find out if someone's predisposed. Not everybody is. Some people are going to be able to use cannabis as a teenager and have no effect. I'm one of them. Okay, it had a little bit of an effect. But not much. It came and went. It was a phase. I tried it. I didn't like falling asleep. That's all it did for me. That was my physiology. It didn't give me the kicks I wanted. So I moved on, and a lot of kids are going to be like that, but some will be affected the rest of their life. Who are they? Let's find out. Let's find out. Let's inform their parents. Let's inform them. Because, you know, there are a lot of kids. If you started separating them and say, look, see those, your buddies over there? They're going to be fine. Not so good for you. You should have a beer. Our aptitude for happiness and well-being and satisfaction is also heritable. Did you know that you have a set point for happiness? How many people knew that? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I'm writing a book right now on happiness, on what we know about happiness and well-being. And I'm learning a lot about the set point theory. About 50% is determined at birth, about how happy you can be. About 10%, it turns out, is your environment, and about 40% is your choices. We know this because we've done longitudinal studies of twins. And when they were separated at birth, we followed them, and they had all these different life experiences. But here's what's really interesting. The most interesting research, you'll find this fascinating, is that whether you win the lottery or you're in a terrible accident, you become paraplegic, you return to your set point of happiness within 2 years. The really massive events in your life do make a change, but you snap back. Happiness is elastic. You come back to your set point. So you know what we're working on now as scientists? How do we get the set point up? What do we do? How do we get that set point up? Because everybody, it's not the same for everybody. So we're trying to learn about that and what items help you get your set point up so that you'll always return to a higher marker. By the way, you return to your set point unless these 4 things happen. So these are the 4 things you have to focus on to have community well-being. Basic needs have to be met. Safety, shelter, food, water. You don't have those, not really going to get to your set point. Prolonged unemployment. These studies have been done by economists in Europe. It was shocking. In addition to death of a close one and an extreme traumatic event like concentration camps during the war, unemployment is at the top of the list. And once you're unemployed for a long period of time, you never come back to your set point. It's shocking what unemployment does to us. So it's not the money. It's not the money, it's the well-being. No social network. You would have to increase the GDP in the United States by 4 times to have the same result of well-being amongst people as giving each person someone that they can call in times of trouble. Since I don't think the GDP is going to increase by 4-fold, that means all of you have to do it. All of you have to take care of the problem. And of course, ongoing physical pain. Other factors that are coordinating with subjective well-being, this is, I couldn't even go on and on and on. I have like 100 more items. One of the weird ones is the more dentists you have in your community. It's a weird correlation. It turns out that communities that have more dentists tend to have higher subjective well-being. We have no idea why. It could be because the communities are wealthier and people take care of their teeth more. I'm not really sure. I'm never telling my dentist this because I am not a fan of dentists. But it's true. But there are a lot of correlations. And if you don't know what they are, you should know what they are. You should get this slide and look at them and say, what things can we affect that really will affect general well-being in our community? Learn what they are. And speaking of meeting needs, what about homelessness? I am so tired of talking about homelessness. I really am. It's been going on since I knew how to speak. And it's getting worse and worse. In the city of Los Angeles, they're estimating now it's going to cost $1.85 billion to solve the homeless problem. And HUD's latest estimate is about $40,000 per person. But here's the problem I have, and you can see why I'm frustrated. You see this 3D printed house? This was done for under $4K. It's about 600 to 800 square feet, and it can be done in under 12 hours now. My slide, see how fast progress moves? By the time I made the slide, it was already under 12 hours. Yeah. And you can make 2-story houses. See, that's a picture of the 3D printer. They're nice. They're solid. They're not going to break down, deteriorate. They need very little maintenance. China built 10 of these homes in one day. They are taking these printers throughout the countryside, and they are setting up villages for homeless people with full services. Now, if we can build a person a house for and in China it was only $3,000. If we can build houses for people for $3,000, what the heck are we doing? Come on. Come on. These problems are solvable. And no, I'm not running for office. Other 3D printing applications. You can verify everything I'm telling you on the internet. Other 3D applications, custom food on demand. Do you have a picky eater? I do. I had one child who, I had to make things into shapes of animals. Apparently that made mom's bad cooking taste better. I don't know. But you can use 3D printers to create all kinds of shapes and things if you have difficult eaters. Also, all of this furniture and this clothing is produced by 3D printers as well. If you don't know what 3D printers are, go on the internet, learn. We're also creating biological parts, organs. We can produce meat. We can produce human tissue, grafting tissue. We can produce body parts. And you know what's really nice is these 3D printers are coming into the surgery room. What I love about that is before we used to have to take a guesstimate of your spinal column. Now we take it out, the 3D printer scans it and puts the exact precise piece back in. It's fabulous. People that used to do eye surgery, these guys that do eye surgery, they used to have to stock thousands of lenses. Because right in the middle of doing the eye surgery, they popped the lens. They really didn't know what kind of lens to replace with. And they hoped they had it on stock. because you're in the middle of surgery. You can't wait for an Amazon drone to bring it to you, right? Right? So what are you doing? So now they don't have to do that anymore. They take the lens and they produce a 3D printed lens there, exactly to your specifications. It's safer, it's better. And how about AB626? I was asked about this, and I said, you know what? We have scanners now that'll hook onto your cell phone and tell you if there's E. coli in the food. Do you know this? They'll scan for bacteria. They'll also scan, by the way, for the nutritional content of the food. And they're very cheap. Scion has one. There's all kinds of these scanners. And so as AB 626 comes in, are you going to make these vendors responsible? Maybe if they're at the farmer's market, they have to have a scanner available so people can scan and see how safe the food is, right? But all these scanners are available, and they're very cheap. They're under $100. So the technology I'm talking about, I'm going to talk about some expensive technology, but the stuff I'm talking to you about is practical. It's very practical when you look at the kind of budgets and the amount of money that's spent on homelessness and opioid addiction after the fact. And you look at those dollars, we can cut those out by just solving the problem beforehand. How about disaster predaptation? Well, by the way, this morning I was watching in LA, you have drones that are looking at the weather. They're going out beyond the ocean just to verify the cloud cover's coming in, that kind of stuff. That's really cool. The GOES next generation weather satellites were just launched, and they have 3 times more data, 4 times the resolution, and they're 5 times faster. So the recent hurricane predictions were spot on, like nobody's business. The recent hurricane down in Texas, if you remember, it came inland, it went back out to the ocean, then it came inland again. And out of the 6 models, 5 were very accurate. Time-wise, how much rain was going to be dropped. We're getting better and better, folks. And as we get better, this is putting more pressure, right, on local leaders. Because we can anticipate what's going to happen. We know when we're in forest fire danger. We know when we're in flood danger. We know when we're in mudslide danger. And if we can give people an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes, it makes all the difference in the world, right? It won't solve the poverty issue. Telling people, stock up on a week's worth of food, right? Get extra batteries, all that. If you're living hand to mouth, that's not a strategy, by the way. Right? So telling people, well, it's your fault because you didn't have money to go get the things to prepare is not a long-term strategy. You have to look at some people who cannot do those things and prepare those packages in advance. I live up on the coast of Oregon now, and I happen to live in a tsunami zone. I went from earthquakes in California to tsunamis. You might not want to listen to me today. But there's also new technology for tsunamis. You've seen these balls. Right? And they're now putting these on top of buildings so that if the tsunami does reach the top of the building or causes the building to fail, workers can get in them safely, and they're making them larger and larger and larger as they go. And in terms of forest fires, we now have coverings which people can go out and get or the city can invest in that'll cover major buildings. And of course, building a perimeter is important. One thing you might not know, and I learned because I used to live up in Big Sur, and you might know that a couple of years ago we had a big fire and it was headed toward my house. And I happened to be sitting with a friend of mine, and he was doing construction on his house, and he said, I don't think sheetrock burns because you use it as a firewall between your garage and your home. It's part of the California Building Code. So he grabbed a couple of pieces of sheetrock that he had in the garage and he threw them in the fireplace and they didn't burn. So we hustled down to Home Depot and we bought out all the sheetrock, hired anybody who would come, and we nailed all of our houses with sheetrock. And we saved our homes. It was really cheap. But people were taking pictures of our houses. They looked like an Andy Warhol style modern bunker. But we covered our decks, we covered our roofs, and we were able to save our homes. Sheetrock is cheap. That might be one solution for important buildings. But when the largest retailer in the US, they heard that hey, milk production in cows goes down when the temperature goes down. They tapped NOAA's meteorological database and they started locking in milk prices before the temperature went up. And they beat out all their competitors in doing that. You see how that data can be used as a huge advantage? You can get out ahead of things, not just solving problems, but also it opens up new opportunities. So here's some other predaptive technologies. Facial recognition software. How many of you are familiar with facial recognition software? Well, here's some cool ways to apply it. In one hospital, right, they have a facial recognition software camera posed on all of their patients. And when the patient starts to show agitation from pain, because we show all of our feelings through our face. We show anger, we show pain, we show happiness through our face. That's how humans are designed. And so when they begin to see motion that indicates pain, it rings the nurse's station. And before you annoyingly ring the buzzer 1,000 times, they bring you pain medication. Wow, right? Because when I was in the hospital, a really mean nurse came in and she said, what's your pain level, 1 to 10? 1 being low, 10. What answer is there? 10. It's always 10. Does anyone ever give a different answer than 10? No. That's not a way to decide to give someone pain medication. Oh, you said 4, you don't get any. Please. If you ever get asked that by a nurse, the answer is 10. And in education, they're using facial recognition software. Right? They have in one classroom, an experimental classroom I saw, they had a monitor in the back, and the teacher was giving a lecture. And in real time, the number of students who were getting the lecture and the number who weren't getting was going up and down a dial. It was driving the teacher nuts. And she could stop and she'd say, okay, most of you didn't get that point. I'm going to go back over it. It was very cool. She knew which things she had glossed over that the students didn't get and who was tuned out. Right? Imagine having that feedback in training. Just because I'm talking to you doesn't mean you're getting everything. But if I had facial recognition software on all of you, and I had a monitor in the back, I'd say, okay, these guys are paying attention over here. I'm going to go over here. Right? And also in interviewing. When you're interviewing a client, when you're interviewing someone to work with, facial recognition will pick up deceit. It will pick up exaggerations on resumes or conditions. You know, the person who comes in and says, oh, I'm asking for a friend of mine. You never get any of those. And deflecting. It'll pick up deflecting and indicate that. Wouldn't it be nice to have that? You can get that on a camera on your computer. Just tilt it toward the person. And you'll have a gauge right there. Right there. And say, let's go back over that job you said you had. Yeah. We're also entering a new era of robotics. Right? Not just surgical robotics, but remember I was talking to you about isolation, loneliness, someone you can turn to in times of trouble and all. One way to reach out to people is using holographic imagery. Another way is using robots. Another way is teleconferencing. Even these things have been shown to ameliorate. They aren't as good as a live human being in touch. They never will be. But they will ameliorate. And we have using robots to do heavy lifting, lift patients and take them in for x-rays, right? To guide people in these giant mazes called hospitals, right? If you are working in elder care and you happen to live in a big building or on the second floor of a large government building, have a robot there that says, may I take you to the office you're looking for, right? And guide you there. And nothing is going to revolutionize medicine faster than nanobots. We now are doing experiments where nanobots, these are robots the size of a human cell, are being injected into Norwegian rats. And they have been programmed to eliminate the plaque that occurs before Alzheimer's. Then they turn themselves off and they're eliminated. These are much smaller than the dirt you eat with your salad. You don't have to be afraid, oh my God, I'm going to be injected with a robot. If I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know, right? But in the future, and I'm talking about the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to look savage cutting someone open and taking an organ out and saying, well, we had to do that to cure you. I mean, that's going to look little Neanderthal. Instead, you're going to be injected with a nanobot, and the nanobot will eat the cancers, right? It will eat the bacteria. It will even give you a reading on the outside of what your nutritional deficiencies are. It'll ping your cell phone and say, you're really low on vitamin E. You better take some, right? These are very, very tiny robots, and we are working at the molecular level, and lab experiments are already going on right now. And of course, you know about the Human Genome Project and how that revolutionized medicine. We are now studying the gut, the microbiome, the human microbiome. And we're discovering that depending on the balance there, it's affecting everything. Your moods, it affects your vulnerability to disease. It's affecting everything, and we didn't know, and we know nothing about it. I know the top scientists that are working on microbiome research, and we are just starting to understand how those bacteria and how that balance plays a very, very important role. Drones, you know drones are coming, but what you may not know is that Mercedes-Benz introduced a drone, right, that has a runway at the top of the Mercedes, and it's dispatching drones while the Mercedes van is driving on the freeway. Now think about in disasters, right, where you're going to ask people to shelter in place. How are they supposed to get medicines and food? Are you going to send someone up to their door? Probably not, right? But imagine a vehicle continually moving on the freeway that sends a drone, drops off, comes back to relocates the Mercedes, picks up the next package, and moves on. Never have to get off the freeway. And Amazon, as you know, has filed for a patent for dirigibles that will fly overhead and will dispatch drones from there. So it won't be coming from warehouses anymore. They don't believe in stationary warehouses. They're moving to mobile warehouses. This is very important for dispatching everything from medicine to food supplies, right, to any kind of help. And if you are not aware, you know, the self-driving cars, I'm completely uninterested in self-driving cars. That, to me, I learned about that many, many years ago. I love the flying cars. They're in mass production in Slovakia right now. You can go to Aeromobile, and you can see the owner get in. He hits traffic. He goes off the traffic road. About the length of a football field. The wings open up in his Prius-looking car, and he flies over the traffic and lands down on the field. What is your plan for that? When would you use it? How would you use it? How many of those should you have? I think a lot. Self-driving cars aren't going to do anything for traffic, believe me. Flying cars, yes. Yes. Virtual and augmented reality, of course. We're at the point now where we can take pictures of your digestive system, your heart, and all of those things working. They're helping with surgical navigation. Holographic imagery, remember one of the things I told you is that having a contact, having social contact, you need to socialize. The average person, in order to maintain a steady state of well-being, must socialize 6 hours a day. We know the number. It's not a mystery. Under 6 hours a day of social contact is the road to depression and isolation. Now, if you go to work, you automatically got the 6 hours, right? In fact, you're probably saying, leave me alone, get out of my office a lot of the time, right? But for those who are not working, how do you get that 6 to 8 hours in? And embedded sensor technology. We have sensors in everything, clothing, canes, walkers. One of the most exciting sensor uses that I've seen is embedded in diapers. right? Because babies in the NICU, right? We don't really know what's going on. And actually, urinary tract infections, very, very common. And guess what? On the other end, for seniors, very, very common. What's wonderful about these things is once the diaper's used, all you have to do is take your cell phone, click on the sensor, and it tells you the nutritional deficiency, too much sugar in the urine, get the baby into the hospital. How many new mothers would benefit from that? Right? All of this data, let's think of all the data we get from urine. We're wasting it. We're wasting urine. We need to put it to use. And how about the switch from classical computing to quantum computing? If you haven't heard quantum computing before, it's because we haven't stabilized atoms enough to be able to talk about it. And I'm not going to have time to explain it to you today, but it turns out we've discovered atoms can exist in 2 states at one time. And that has really sped up our ability to compute results and possible outcomes. They did a quick test in China, and they discovered that they said, all right, we're going to compute 2 routes for Chinese cab drivers to get to the main airport. And using computing that you and I all use, it took about 45 minutes for them to get to the airport, and 45 minutes for them to come up with a solution. And the quantum computing system did it in a fraction of 1 second. Now, I would love to stand here and tell you there's going to be this really nice migration path from classical computing. It's not going to be that way. It's going to be awful. It's going to be awful. It's going to make everything we're doing and using and all the software we have right now unusable. There is no migration path between classical computing and quantum computing, which is why you need to learn something about it. And of course, in 2013, we decided to map the human brain, which is also another very significant event in science, in addition to studying the human microbiome. And I know that there have been others that have been talking about brain fitness, but we have done many, many, many studies, and we now know that brain fitness will fend off Alzheimer's, will help seniors. You know, one insurance company that I was speaking with, they decided to put it to test, and what they did was they gave a bunch of seniors brain fitness software, and they said, we're going to see that you log on in the morning, right, for 10 minutes before you start up your car and drive. Because most of the accidents for seniors happen the first 10 minutes they're driving. And it's because their peripheral vision isn't developed. It hasn't woken up yet. And by simply giving them these tools, they were able to cut down the number of accidents by, I think, about 25%. So it's good. Insurance guys are all over this. As well as we're learning more and more about the brain's predictive neurons and really interesting brain waves like the P3000 that indicates that we're forward thinking and we're anticipating. All right, I have my 10-minute warning. I better speed it up, huh, Brett? Are you having fun? Yes. Okay. Brett, I get more than 10 minutes. All right. With so much new opportunity, you're probably asking yourself, wow, I want to move next to Rebecca so she can come over and tell me about the latest and greatest. But here's the thing, I have business cards, and you can contact me and reach out to me anytime you'd like, anytime you've got a question. But how do you get started? Well, here's what you got to do. I'm going to make it really simple. You're going to look at these things, you're going to say, we're going to do something about it or we're not. Yes or no, don't sweat the details. Just make a decision. Make any decision. No more meetings. By the way, if you're ever in a meeting that has more than 7 people in it, somebody has to get voted off the island. I'm sorry. We've already done tests, lots of social science tests, and we know the optimal number is 3 to 7. Make the best decisions. Above 7, you get social posturing, peer pressure, a lot of ugly stuff. Under 3, you don't have enough critical mass. So, count, 1, 2, 3, only put 7. You know what I used to do is only 7 chairs. Whoever came in standing, out. Then you're going to categorize the technologies, and you're going to say, which is market-driven? It fulfills an existing need our market has, like online payments, right? You didn't invent online paying. Your customer said, hey, can I just pay you online? And you went, okay, well, we got to do that. We got to make it easy, right? And moonshots. Moonshots they don't know they need it, right? They didn't know. They didn't know there was a questionnaire for opioid predisposition for addiction, right? Nobody knew. Nobody knew there were diapers that you could just take a picture and find out what nutritional deficiency your baby has, whether your baby should get in to see a doctor. Nobody knows that exists, so you're going to create something new that people don't know that they need. And these are two distinct processes. Do not cross wires. They don't get funded the same. They don't take the same length of period to evangelize. One is very high failure. One is very low failure, right? One is slow to develop. One is very fast to develop. They are not alike in any way, shape, or form. And when you do undertake a moonshot, and you say, we're going to skip self-driving cars, we're going straight to flying cars. We're going to have a fleet of flying cars, and we're going to have them ready for disasters. And we're going to get a fleet of Mercedes with those drone runways, and we're going to be ready for shelter in place. We're going to be the first to do that. When you decide to do that, remember that venture capitalists, with all of their resources and money and all of their due diligence, are only right about 15 to 20% of the time. You're going to be dealing with a high rate of failure. And so the way you fund it is you got to fund lots of startup projects and then tie their feet to showing performance along the way. So don't try to pick the one project. Fund a lot of projects, and then you're going to fund them round one. Some aren't going to make the cut for round two. More aren't going to make the cut for round three. And at the end of the day, you'll wind up with some that make it. And that's your 15 to 20%. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into this. I do a workshop on this that takes one whole day. So I know this is going to be unsatisfying and a little frustrating to you, but given the amount of time that we have, I can only tell you that how you fund innovation has as much to do with whether it will succeed or not. Anyone who's never tried anything new has never made a mistake, that's for sure. There are 6 types of failure, only 2 are good, right? So these slides will be available to you. You should study these, and you should make sure that the type of failure in that 80% are the type of failure that indicates you're making progress. Predicted failure, which is like making revisions of things and prototypes of things, are requirements. One more thing I want to leave you with is that personality types matter. You have racers and you have climbers. The racers are guys that are in the pit of the Indianapolis, is it 5,000? 500. 5,000, maybe that's a new one. The Indianapolis 500, there's guys in the pit. You ever see them work? Zzz, putting the new tires on, boom. Okay, you're good to go. Get back out there on the track, right? But they're also climbers. Those are the Sherpas that are going to take you over the Himalaya mountains. The last thing you want in a climber is someone who's in a hurry. That's called dead. Right? So people have predispositions. You have people that come in and they're always in a hurry and they want to get it done. And what's the result? Why do we have to keep having meetings? Let's just do something. And then you have other guys that go, hold on, Joe. We need to look at this one more time and let's look at the numbers again and all that. And you're driving poor Joe crazy. That's because Joe is a racer and he will be good at implementing market-driven innovations. Right? And the other people are climbers, and they're very good at moonshots, new technologies that require evangelizing and careful scrutiny. And these are some of the personality traits of the two of them. And of course, if you do a moonshot, you have to plan on a long period of evangelizing because nobody knows there were sensors in diapers. By the way, at one hospital I was at, I showed them the diapers, and I said, these are under $1 a piece now. And one of the board members came up to me and said, that's going to be a problem for us because diapers are run by the supply people who order cups and plastic plates. And we haven't been using them in diagnostics. So she said, we don't have budget. We don't control the budget for diapers. And I said, that's not a reason. That's not a reason not to do it. But it was their reason. So you have to systematize and institutionalize forward thinking. So in conclusion, the first person to live to 1,000 has already been born. Are you shocked? Yeah, according to Aubrey de Bray in Cambridge University, who's a genetic mathematician, this is the case. I was speaking at a retirement conference where they were planning pension funds. They were the largest pension fund managers in the world. And when this slide came up, they all went, oh, we don't even have pensions for 100-year-olds. That means more people, means more data, and it means more ways to go to them. How can you pre-adapt to the future needs of Long Beach? How can you quash problems before they occur? What's your plan and your method for keeping up with innovations and technology and science that can cure these things? And more importantly, how are you going to measure your success? There are 4 types of organizations: reactive, compensatory, preemptive, and those that are predictive and predaptive. And predaptive organizations make it safe to fail. They make it safe to fail, provided the failure is the good type. Just remember that reconnaissance is not your part-time job between 8 o'clock at night and midnight. You need a plan for staying out ahead of technology and for being able to share that information amongst yourselves. Because the highest instrument of our evolutionary inheritance is to preview outcomes and then act in the present to avert a danger or get a jump on opportunity. And I think did I make the clock? Brett's given me the thumbs up. But I don't have time for Q&A. All right. I know I gave you just a tasting menu, and it's really unfair. You know, we skimmed over a lot of these things. But I will be here later this afternoon, I think at 4 o'clock or so. We have some time together. So please feel free to get a business card, contact me afterwards, or just come up to me. You can see that I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And I'm sorry I ran your Q&A time out.
Thank you very much. This
Thank
is
you.
wonderful. Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. So many great ideas there. And we remember we were talking about vocabulary words. So there was another one, predapt. Getting out in front of things with analytical data before they happen to prevent things from happening. And another one that I thought of when I saw Rebecca was optimism, and that's hope and confidence about the future. So whenever I hear Rebecca speak, I'm optimistic. So thank you again to Rebecca. I thought that was really an amazing speech.